Mark Everson is the former IRS commissioner. He was appointed by George W. Bush, and he was his IRS commissioner for 4 years. And he is also a Republican presidential candidate. Now, that certainly intrigued me. So let's welcome Mark Everson to the show. Good morning, sir.
Good morning, Elise. How are you?
Well, I am fine, thank you. You know, we want to get to your presidential candidate thing because that is really intriguing all of us, as if we don't have enough. But guess what? There's room for everybody. I do have one quick question about the IRS because you were the commissioner there. And
yes.
I think that brings some really strong points forward. Lois Lerner. Hey, ever heard of that gal?
Yes. And let me just say a couple things on this whole
Please do.
First, let's say Everson instead of Everson. I'll accept Everson, but if we can go with Everson, that's the
You've
name.
got Everson for sure.
Yeah. Okay, good. But listen, the IRS, I was the commissioner from 03 to 07, and I'm proud to say there was no political targeting during that period. The agency ran well, and nobody was more disturbed, at least, than I was when all these revelations came out in 2013, both as to the substance, meaning the idea that the policy views of organizations rather than the activities were being assessed. Entirely appropriate for the service to say, under the law, you're not allowed to do A, B, and C. But just to screen applicants for status based on policy views, that was dead wrong. So what they did was wrong. And then the way they dealt with Congress about it was horrific. And it's just sort of stayed that way. What disturbs me now, I'm sure you followed this, in the last week or two, there have been more revelations that instructions were given by the commissioner well after this all took place and was already a very big problem to maintain backup tapes that might have had some of these emails, but they were still erased a month later. So this is it's gone from bad to worse. It's hurt the agency, and frankly, it's hurt Americans' views of their government. So that's a very serious thing.
Absolutely. We're very, very skeptical of everything that's said, of everything that's done, because you see, I think Lois Lerner should have been fired right off the bat. There are some people who think she even should do some time for being for doing the crimes that she did against the American people. I don't know about that because I'm not a lawyer, but I'll tell you something. All around, it was wrong. It was very, very wrong. So the next question that pops up.
Let me just say one thing on that, if I can.
Sure.
There's still an active Department of Justice investigation on all this. What gives? They should bring this to a close, one way or the other, and tell us what happened.
You know, they're much more interested in carrying on about racism and everything else in the world instead of all coming forward with what really should be the real things to show that if you commit crimes, if you mishandle your job and you're a government employee, you really have some consequences to be reckoning with. And it all moves so slowly that I think then the press just drops it. Everybody drops it and they move on to the next thing, which in this particular case with the IRS, in my opinion, is too bad. What do you think, Mark?
No, I agree with you. This has been carrying on all too long. And frankly, nothing's going to change under this president because he was dismissive. He said, look, there's no corruption here. The Justice Department hasn't finished this up. We need to get back to a point where the service is viewed. I was proud to have that job. The president asked me to do it. I didn't seek it out. And I was proud to be a servant in that sense. But the American people have every reason to believe and insist that it be run on a partisan basis. And right now, they don't feel, many people do not feel that's the case. It gets back to a point. Let me comment on your last segment on Secretary Clinton. Well, I'm running for president, as you indicated. I have a 6-point program. Your listeners can go to markforamerica.com to hear about it. But my 6th point of constitutional governance. It is the role of the executive branch to execute the laws as written, not as the president or his subordinates might wish they were. And that's the attitude I took when I ran the IRS. I called it down the middle because the laws are written by Congress. They can be overinterpreted by the executive. Going to Mrs. Clinton, the Secretary Clinton, has said, I'm for immigration reform. I absolutely believe in it. But I take very great offense to what the president's done on his executive order. But because I think he's exceeded his authority here, but she said he hasn't gone far enough. So going to your last segment, it's something to watch out for here, because I think that one reason I'm running is I had 6 years under Reagan, 6 years under Bush. I understand the limits of the powers of the presidency, and I'll respect them.
Well, somebody needs to, because we saw what happened in San Francisco with that illegal alien who actually killed that young woman right there in San Francisco. And I didn't even know this, but there is an actual website that lists all of the people and honors them that are the victims of illegal aliens. And this is unbelievable that we as Americans are not speaking out on this, because there's so many things that need to happen. Let me ask you, we'll get to your presidency right now. Let me ask you why you're running, because there is such a field of so many people, Mark Everson. Of course.
I'm running because I'm not satisfied with where the country's headed. I grew up in the 60s. I'm 60 years old right now. And I went overseas. I became a Republican when I went overseas for a year in 71, 72. I was working on a poultry farm in Zambia, and formative experience. And I saw the world through a different set of eyes. You know, the Vietnam going on at home, and a lot of distrust of the military, dislike of the war. But I came back understanding more of the fact that America is the hope of the world, and I ended up gravitating to the Republicans when they put McGovern up. We had our problems, and Elise, but we had a sense of pride.
Absolutely.
And a sense of optimism, and we've lost that. That's the problem here. We need to unify and move forward as a nation. We need to get back to a spirit of shared sacrifice for the country. Let's think about Kennedy. Kennedy was the president who said, we're going to go to the moon. What did he say, though? In his inaugural, he said, ask not what your country can do for you. Ask what you can do for your country. And politicians of both parties, neither side is asking that question now. They're just saying, if you do what I say, everything will be fine. It'll be painless. No sacrifice on your part. And that's not the case. We've got to sort of take our medicine, make some adjustments, and get back to where we have pride in being Americans.
I agree with you 100%. Can you tell us about your campaign right now? What are you actually doing? Have you announced this? I don't know. Neither does my audience.
Well, that's okay. I know you're out on the coast. I'm in Des Moines, Iowa today. We did two parades yesterday. A parade up in Clear Lake, which was, I think they had 10,000 people there. It was a great parade, people 4 and 5 deep. And then a parade over in Ely, which is in the second largest county in Iowa. So we've got a traditional campaign where we're making the rounds. The people of Iowa, they don't buy the idea that the big media and the rich donors are going to coronate the next president. They want to see the candidate, meet the candidate, him or her. So that's one piece. The other thing I've got is this 6-point program, and it speaks to the issues that I've concluded over a life in the private sector and in government. I've run a factory on the south side of Chicago, make beverage cans. I've got a permanent sort of slight ringing in my ears. I've lived and worked in Turkey, France, and Zambia, but I've also got government experience, 6 years with Reagan, 6 years with Bush. And so I offer a combination of experiences, and I'm stating issues that I think we need to talk about, like the politics, the other piece of this constitutional governance. I'm sick, as Americans are, of the politics taking over. So I've said I'm running for a single 4-year term. That's it. And that's based on the hard lessons of being in the Reagan administration or being in the Bush administration, 2 good administrations. But by year 3, everybody up and down the line is talking about the reelect. So they're worried. Am I going to have to go back to L.A.? I just got here. And so They start taking different decisions. So I'm saying I'm going to just do the job, only be concerned about national interest from day one until January 20th, 4 years later. And I'm not going to worry about the politics. That's one point.
Don't you think that that's what the Founding Fathers wanted to happen? They didn't want career politicians.
I think that what has happened is it's unfortunate that we've got more and more powers going into the executive branch, and it's at the same time become more and more political.
Yes. So I interrupted you with your 6 points. Go with number 2.
Yeah, well, that's actually sort of number 6. Number one is tax reform. And I suggest the fair tax, flat tax, those are great, but they don't bring in enough revenue unless you make them at a very high level, and then they're regressive, and they help the rich, but not, and they hurt the middle class, if you will. I've got a program that was developed by Michael Gratz. He was a Bush 41 official and a very distinguished professor. And what the program is, it's a hybrid system. You put in a consumption tax. If you do that, you can take 150 million Americans off the income tax roll. You leave just the high end, couples earning over $100,000 a year. They would pay a much reduced income tax. And that actually, what it does is at least it returns the income tax to what it was a century ago, only applied to the well-to-do. And the other thing it does is if you do this program, you can lower the corporate tax rates. Everybody agrees, Democrat and Republican alike, we need to have lower statutory rates on the big businesses so that they can be more competitive overseas. The nice thing about this program is that it brings in the same amount of money, about the same amount of money as we're getting now. Some of these plans, Rand Paul, Marco Rubio, they fall way short. And frankly, we need the amount of money we're getting in, even if you plan to cut spending, which I do. And the other thing about it is it's distributionally neutral, this plan. It doesn't increase the taxes for the rich. It leaves the middle about the same, and it leaves the bottom end about the same. So that, I think, is fair. The second point is about our financial institutions, and it talks about lending. The community banks are dying, so we need to do something to get them back in business. And the mega banks are just more and more concentration of assets in the 5 mega banks, and this is wrong. If you're too big to fail, you're just too big, and frankly, they're lawless. I was on the President Bush's corporate fraud task force. We sent Canlay, Scrushy, Abers, Kozlowski to prison. This administration, they just shake down the big bankers, even though they sign off saying that they violated the law with fixing interest rates, selling shoddy mortgages, fixing foreign currency rates. Nothing happens. They just pay billions of dollars of fines that get absorbed by your 401k plan, and then we go on. So we've got to bring back accountability in the banks. The third point I suggest is national service and foreign affairs. I believe this president has been true to his word. He said he would deal with our adversaries, and he has. I think we need to shift that back to where we're worried about our own interest, and we're worried about relationships with our allies. Very important. The other piece of this, though, is shared sacrifice, what I mentioned earlier. I think we need to put in a program of national service where you go back and you discharge that obligation through service in the military or maybe some other form of service in a park or some other place. But we need to create a system where people are all together in what they do. I live down in Mississippi, which has the lowest per capita income. If you're from Mississippi, you're twice as likely to be a Gulf era vet than if you live in Connecticut, which has the highest per capita income. So I want to get back to shared sacrifice. Point 4 is about the spending. We've got to grapple with these entitlement programs because if we don't, they're going to eat our lunch. And I'm 60. My age group is just starting to draw benefits. And that is going to just really bankrupt our future, and the prospects for our youth will be much diminished unless we change eligibility, tighten things up. And I'm not talking about anybody who's drawing benefits now. I'm talking about phasing them in the future just the way.
Mark, I have to interrupt you here, and I'm not trying to be a wet blanket. But you know what? We have been promised all these things so much by the Republicans when they're coming in, and Democrats too. And then when they actually get there, what happens to them that they don't do anything? It's unbelievable to me. I hear what you're saying, and I agree with every bit of it.
That's why I'm running for a single term, because if you do what you're going to say, you probably wouldn't. First of all, I think there'd be too much politics in it with the reelection. But you probably won't get reelected anyway if you do what needs to be done. So why not just say that up front? At least that's where I am on it.
I love that. I love your attitude on that. I'm very sorry we didn't get a hold of you and get everything set up early on.
It was my fault, I think.
Well, it's okay. We'll have to have you come back again, Mark Everson, because we're running out of time. I totally appreciate what you're doing. I know that there are a lot of Republicans running, and people are getting very weary with that. But hopefully all of the best are going to come to the top, and we're going to get a great candidate. So, Mark Everson, come back on the Elise Richmond Show. We'll talk more about this. Good luck on the campaign trail, and thank you for being on this morning.
Well, thank you. Nice to talk to you. And we've still got a great country, Elise, and a happy 4th of July weekend to you and all your listeners.
And the same to you. Thank you, sir. Take care now.
You as well. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Well,